Welcome to the Flow State podcast. I am Flow State founder and managing director, Stuart P. Turner. In this 5-episode mini-series, we're talking about the implications of AI, cutting through the hype to talk about real-world use cases, real examples, and what it means to people in their day-to-day jobs. So, Belinda, thanks for joining. Welcome to the show. For those who don't know you, ABM professional, creator of demand for B2B. Is there anything else that people should know about you, and your career?
No, there isn't offhand, because I don't want to say that I've had a long and varied career.
Illustrious and varied career.
Illustrious, prolific, yes.
like it. Well, look, thanks for joining and talking about the implications of AI from all viewpoints. So, look, starting with the big question. Is this the start of the robot revolution? And are we in a kind of Terminator style situation right now? Or is that all just a bit of hyperbole and we should all calm down? What are your thoughts on that?
I find it really interesting because there is a lot of fear mongering going on.
Bit of panicking.
A bit of people wondering if they're not going to have a job tomorrow, especially in our industry.
Yeah.
It's quite funny because my husband works in a completely different industry. And I happened to mention ChatGPT, and he goes, "Oh yeah." I went, "Okay, well that's good for that."
Is that the sum total of his thoughts on it? Is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. There is a barometer that I think we as marketers, we as content creators, are focused on, whereas the rest of the world isn't focused on it. They're just worried that people are going to not have their own thoughts.
Yeah, okay.
That artificial intelligence is going to push through in the next 5 years and we're going to become subservient to the robots.
To some sort of robot overlord.
Exactly.
New society.
Exactly. And just in the past, month, the proliferation of content generation tools. There is a new tool that I've been looking at which trains the models on your own previous content.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So it's moving at quite a speed, which I think we all have to get on board with. And I think if we try and do things the ultra controlled way, say we have to, every email has to be viewed and vetted by 4 different people, we're going to get lost because there are already conversations happening. I do not think that it is going to take the place of copywriters. I think there does need to be a human set of eyes. And we've been through this. We've been through this with SEO. We've been through this with people who tried to game the system. And then we were told that the internet is here, user-generated content means that professional content creators will no longer exist.
Yeah.
Now we've got streaming services. Now we've got people who are hungry for consuming content through so many different types of new media that it's actually born more content creators than ever.
Yeah, okay. I think that's quite an interesting point actually, because the point you raised around the panic over change. Like I actually liken this to the Kindle example or e-readers, right, where people were like, "But there'll be no books ever now that Bezos has released the Kindle," and I'm like, I have a Kindle because it's very practical. But if you look at like trends like book talk, people still love real books. Like it's nice to read a book and not look at a screen all the time and just have that, the experience of going to a bookshop or a library and, having something in your hands. Like, I don't think that's ever going to be replaced in our lifetime, right? Like nothing will be completely digitized.
No. And I mean, if you look at all these wellness apps, this is hilarious. You read about a wellness app that says, go for a walk.
Yeah, it's like go outside.
Read a book.
Go touch some grass, as the gamers like to say, right? Yeah.
As the game, yeah. I mean, technology is moving so fast, but what we're made of organically, we're not built for.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Hey, and like I think the other point you raised around the quality, like I've been talking a lot about the quality of the data that goes into these models at the moment, and there's a whole, to use another old school example, of making a copy of a copy. If if you used a photocopier, which perhaps a lot of people who will listen to this might not be familiar with, but if you have an original copy of something and you copy it many, many times, like you copy, the quality degrades naturally because it's never a perfect copy. And I think that like analogy applies to the AI models that everyone's using now, right? Because I think it was on Hard Fork. I was at one of my other favorite podcasts. I was listening to this. They were talking about how there's been a study, I think, in the US about how if you continue to pit AI against each other and continue to get robots talking to robots, the quality of the output degrades because they're just producing a slightly worse outcome every single time. So,
Exactly.
that's where the human factor comes in,
That's where
right?
the human factor comes in because well, I think what we're missing in all of this is humans created this. And it is to automate processes that ease our workload so that we can continually take that step back.
Mm,
And that's what I think a lot of people are missing.
yeah.
A lot of people are talking about AI. And so I've been on the Discord chat for Midjourney. I've
Oh
been
yeah.
looking at those tools. And there are some true artists out there, and they are making these tools work for them. And I don't think you're ever going to take that away.
Yeah.
But what we do, especially in B2B and tech marketing, it's going to come down to someone who knows what they're talking about, wants to connect with someone else who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
We've got 31 touch points in a buyer journey, and that's without us. Like 80% of it is self-guided. So we're not using it to take over pre-sales, take over engineers. It's really just to get that conversation started. And it's interesting you're talking about the degradation because robots talking to robots is an intellectual pursuit, and that's up here,
Mm,
people who design robots. For the rest of us, we're still looking for that sale.
yeah. Yeah. And look, I think that's an interesting way to kind of draw it back to real life because there is, as you said, there is a lot of intellectual sort of waxing lyrical about like where all this could go, but in practical terms, and again, we've been speaking a lot about this. We use a lot of these models to do a lot of like the boring analysis that would take people ages and will probably be quite error prone or bias filled. Um, and it's interesting you mentioned the buyer journey because, like, are there areas where you think it's going to add like a huge amount of value right now across the current B2B buyer journey? Because that is a complicated process now
Yes.
to deliver anything against.
Yes, because so there's something that we've been exploring. I say we, meaning me, in my own time. And it's really taking the idea of a digital twin from people think that a digital twin is just a carbon copy or a digital copy, I should say, of what you've got, like we couldn't do in the studio, like we could do with a warehouse. A warehouse is what people think about most often.
Mm,
But if you think about digital twinning in terms of recreating a scenario whereby you bring in new technology, that's where this kind of stuff, especially when it comes to image makers.
mm,
So using a generative AI tool for creating those diagrams rather than having a sales engineer work with a team of people for 6 weeks saying we could do it this way, we could do it. You can create what if scenarios.
yeah.
The video element of it isn't there yet. So right now we're still working with PNGs. But what I've discovered is being able to talk to these tools and say, this is a really complex concept. And then it gives back to you, well, this is how I think it works, rather than,
Yeah. Okay.
briefing a creative who doesn't have that technical background. This is, for me, it's a bridge. It's bringing these worlds closer together.
Exactly as you just said, the more practical use cases that we've seen are when you take a much smaller set of inputs, if you like, and just apply it to a very specific outcome. Like exactly as you were saying, if you're trying to visualize a complex solution, like just explaining how you want that to be visualized, I feel like that's where you get the best outcome from the models that we've tested, as opposed to the sort of Google or Microsoft style huge data analysis, because I almost feel like that's where they may fall over more when you're trying to do something massive based on a set of data that may have some inherent bias. Whereas, if it's very specific, like you're saying with Midjourney, I have this one thing that I want to know. Can you tell me that yes or no? That seems a safer way to use that. Do you agree with that? Or
I agree with it because every time we give that type of feedback into the data set that's learning, that the machine is learning from, that's where we can sort of map that journey to actual intelligence. Because what we're looking at now is we're looking at people telling us this is how artificial intelligence is going to develop from machine learning.
Yeah, okay.
And we're looking at a giant scraper. I'm old enough as you to know what a
So
scraper
so
is. And that's my experience with ChatGPT.
mm,
It's not AI, but it will get there because it has that capacity. So if we keep feeding it questions rather than sort of strange scenarios because people are bored,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's, you know,
Yeah. And it's funny you say that actually, because I think going back to what you were talking about at the start, this is where the hype versus reality gap is for me. Where what you have right now is not what I would call true artificial intelligence, and I don't think anyone designing it would say that either. What you have is a very advanced predictive model that knows from a huge variety of outcomes what the next likeliest thing to happen is, and that's very different. It's not. It's still very useful, but it's not as exciting as like the Skynet solution, right? Where, there's an actual intelligence that's been created. Like we're miles away from that at the moment in terms of the things that are publicly released. I don't know about privately.
it's evolving and it's learning, and we should be helping it because there are so many biases in the data. And I read this great thing yesterday about if you want to market to millennials, cut out gender, cut out age from your data sets. So think about the models that are being trained now
Mm,
with these big telcos, for example, who are saying we can give fantastic CX because we're using every single data point at our disposal.
mm,
And yet they've got massive segments that the new generation who'll be buying from them just aren't interested in.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's. I mean, again, going back to your point around having the human strategic oversight on this, like that's exactly where this becomes an issue, right? Where if you're just feeding in the women aged whatever the cohort is, 35 to 45 will always do this, and it's like, well, just because they've always done that in the past doesn't mean that they're always going to do that in the future, right? It's going
That's
to
my
lead you to an
favorite phrase. We've always done it like this before.
yes, the clarion call of no, we won't do whatever your idea is because it sounds different and weird. So no, yeah. Look, going back to what you were saying earlier as well, Melinda. I think what's actually most exciting to me at the moment, keen to hear what you think about this, is the fact that, as you said, if you put aside like the hype and all the buzzwords, the most useful part of this is making marketing more efficient and less error prone with better data analysis, better, more efficient processes, and just a general sort of way to tie things together that you didn't have at your disposal before. So have you been doing any of that, or have you seen any of that in your current role? Like, are there any areas where you're like, oh, this has actually been really useful to sort of start to automate this process or deploy the use of a model within your current sphere of influence?
It works really well for small teams. So if you're lean and if you've got a team that you can't properly onboard into a product because the product is it's too technical,
Mm,
I found this is a really good way to deploy some customer engagement rapidly, which matters to the customer, not necessarily us inwardly focusing.
yeah. Okay.
And you can just keep growing that because when we do digital marketing, it's all about test and learn. What is the market reacting to? What is it saying? And the only way you can do that is with vast amounts of content.
Mm,
And then that content feeds the data that is typically your manual process to analyze. And so this is where I see the greatest room for expansion. It was really interesting. I spoke to someone in the US last week, and she said the comment was, I don't like ABM. I've tried ABM, and the audience pools were too small. And
right.
I thought, but that's not ABM.
Mm,
ABM is bringing an experience to either a single strategic account or a tiny group of accounts because you want them to feel that. You want them to
yeah.
feel that immersive love. So if you're looking at an audience pool of a couple of 100,000, you're not doing ABM, you're doing ads.
Yeah. I was going to say that's sort of just standard demand gen or normal marketing, right? If you've gone beyond that small cohort of accounts. I mean,
Exactly. I wouldn't even call it demand gen. I'd call it marketing because at
yeah.
least in demand gen, you're segmenting the customers.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
So
That's
that
quite an interesting bit of insight from the US there.
it was really funny. And it's really something that I think we can overcome when we take out some of those erroneous data sets
Mm.
and replace it with this is our own experience, or this is what the market is responding to, meaning our market targets.
Yeah, look, I think this is an area that you and I think very similarly around, because we were chatting about this earlier about the finding intent data and qualification of accounts or people in market, which is obviously an ongoing battle in the B2B space to try and understand what stage people are at and how you can best support them in their own journey. But that's where we've actually seen sort of most successful use of some of the models in our own processes is analyzing, large chunks of social media data, or, scraping, as you were saying, like a load of potential market research from various places, and then just doing that basic analysis to say, like, well, what were all these people talking about for the past 3 months, and which were the most prevalent themes or topics, or which sites are they linking to, and, talking about. It's pretty straightforward stuff, but that's where we're
You
actually
think it
seeing.
is.
I mean, maybe just for us it is, but it's that's where the most value's been, because it actually is helping us to understand our customers much more effectively and say, well, look, like, as you would expect, probably 70 to 80% of those people are not relevant right now, but the 10 to 20% that we find, that's where you can then sort of start to shape up a bit more of an interesting way to reach them, right? I mean, how are you, have you found that working, within your team at the moment?
It's interesting because we everything related to demand is content. You need the content to drive the engine. So I'm not a designer by any stretch of the imagination, but what I'm finding interesting and useful is using generative AI tools to explain concepts not just to the target accounts, but also to my team,
Mm,
and to help them understand we're trying to put ourselves in the place of someone that we don't know. And that's where we need to use or automate where possible
yeah,
as
okay.
marketers. Because you're right. I mean, some of the stuff that you guys are doing at Flow State it is machine learning. It is akin to what Google's doing. When you open up Google Ads, and this is what a lot of people forget. When you open up Google Ads, Google's got a widget that says this is trending this
Mm,
week or this month. And that's been there for about 5 years, and no one paid attention to it, but everyone pays attention to ChatGPT.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that's how I'm putting it together. And with some of the stuff that you guys are doing with that balance of automation and manual eyes on the engagement, I think is where it all starts to come together.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously I agree, because that's what we're doing day in day out. But I think it's interesting what you were saying about using these tools to explain things within the context of someone else's point of view. Because I'm interested to know, like, how you see that sort of evolving from here, particularly with the visual side, because I haven't explored that as much. But I know, as you were saying, some people are doing some amazing things with like Mid Journey and the other
Wow.
generative sort of creative engines. And Adobe, I know, have launched a few into Photoshop, which looks quite cool to kind of extend photos, producing some weird results at the moment, I think, but I can see where it's going. But have you actually managed to reproduce, like, because I know you guys are selling a fairly complex solution at the moment, have you produced any sort of useful functional diagrams or explainers that you felt
Yes.
have worked really well? And what were those?
So, for example, I had a 4-hour briefing session with a designer.
It's quite a deep cut brief, that one.
Always fun. It was a really big PowerPoint for a webinar. And I just kept going over and over in my head, and I thought the way you speak to designers is here's something I found on another website. That's the visual I'm trying to think of, but they still need to make the connection in their head with what they're creating.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a language barrier. I never have. Uh, but what I found with these generative image tools is I can say everything that an engineer and I have talked about, and it will give me that image.
Yeah, that's cool.
And then you can manipulate how you want the line, because line style is also really important.
Mm,
And then you can keep talking to it. That's why I like the generative part, because you can keep adding on. You can say, no, can you make it simpler? Or can you show me the interlock between these two systems, for example? So
yeah,
very
okay.
specifically, I was trying to create a technical drawing of how two systems come together to then connect to a bunch of other systems.
Yeah, okay.
And it worked beautifully.
Nice. See,
So
that's cool.
the content is still up to us. We've still got to fill in the blanks, as it were. But think about that from a marketing time standpoint and think
Mm,
about it from an operational standpoint. We still need a designer to turn it into an animation or turn it into a vector file.
yeah.
But that type of use is what we should be looking at as marketers.
As you were saying, in the space that, we're both working in, where everyone has a slightly different requirement, the briefing time to say, look, we essentially need this diagram, six different ways with six different sets of content and six different sort of perspectives for different people in a buying group. Like the ability to do that in, like half an hour, I guess, instead of 4 hours is massive, right? I mean, that's a huge resource saving all around.
Huge resource saving. And think about what technology marketers are facing globally, which is stakeholders getting nervous, boards of directors getting nervous, people in general getting nervous because they're told they should be nervous. So all of these technology buying groups are insulating themselves, not necessarily because they don't have the funds, but they just think that they need to. They need to batten down the hatches. So us on the other side trying to communicate with them, we're running really lean teams. There was someone, and I don't remember the name of the company, who set up a demand gen center for APAC over the past 2 years. Amazing piece of work, beautiful structure, but that was 30 people
Yeah, okay.
working round the clock to produce the type of content that we now need to produce with 1-2 people
Mm,
in the space of a week.
yeah, right.
So the pressures on technology marketers in particular are really immense because customers don't want to talk to us.
Yeah.
They want to self-navigate, they want to self-educate, and then they'll tap us when they're ready. So we have to continually put that content out there.
Yeah. And look, I think for you guys in particular, and anyone who's in that space of, sort of data architecture, and, you know, digital transformation infrastructure essentially is like the space you're in, right? Like I would say is an accurate way to describe that.
Yes.
Um, the ways into a platform like the one that you guys currently sell are myriad. Like there's so many different potential ways to discover it that, as you said, I think that challenge is like a real difficult one at the moment where people are like, as you said, they've got money, they just don't necessarily want to spend it, and they think they can self-educate. But yeah, I've gone through this process myself with Google's cloud platform and with Azure to an extent, and we do a load of stuff on like Linux and Debian at the moment, and you can kind of self-educate up to a point, but then because it's not my like general area of expertise or day-to-day operation, I'm like, you just hit a point where you're like, I don't want this to become my full-time job, to become like a Google Cloud Platforms expert, because I just don't, I don't care. I just need someone else to do it at that stage. But my entry point to that typically is I have a specific use case, like I need a virtual machine or a server and it needs to do X, Y, Z things. But yeah, there's too much information in those spaces. Google's like documentation for technical people is amazing. Like there's guides and sort of instructions everywhere.
Mm.
But for me as a casual user, there's too much. Like I need to be like, a sort of simple one-stop guide for, you want a server for a database and you want to push X amount of data in, and that's really hard to find, how you do that. There's no like well, there is a one-click install, but I don't think it serves my exact purpose. So how are you guys bridging that gap based on, your new use of Mid-Journey and these models, Melinda? Like how are you making that happen?
The reason I'm laughing is because you're reminding me of, I worked on a global client when I was back on agency side, and I came to them with this idea and I said, we need to talk to a different audience group. We need a 2-pager
Mm,
on this product. And the product at the time was the company just acquired a Kubernetes startup.
yeah, okay.
And so I worked with the guy from the startup and he was all over it because that was his business previously, is how to explain this to business users,
Yeah, right.
not tech people, about the value. So we got that down and then it suddenly went through these multiple layers of a global organization, heavily matrixed, who then came back to me with a 15-page document
Okay.
and no drawings, just a 15-page
Yeah,
document
just a
on.
good bit of bedtime reading to get you into it.
Yeah, and when I think about it, that was actually not that long ago. It was probably about 5 years ago.
Yeah, okay.
So have we evolved since then? I think we need to evolve since then, and that's
Mm,
why everything that's happening with AI, in inverted commas, with machine learning is vital to us understanding what people are consuming, because we're doing it
yeah.
now on a manual level. I don't think there's anyone who can say they're using Sixth Sense that well or they're using Terminus that well. When I speak to vendors, ABM vendors, they still want to get into a room with a customer.
Yeah, of course they do. Trap you in there and then make you sign a contract.
No, coming from the point of your target audience. So who are you targeting? Okay, we need to
Yeah,
talk to
right.
them. So it's still based on that anecdotal human-based evidence.
Mm. See, that's funny as well because I think even from a value proposition perspective, I've been talking about this a lot with my coach slash mentor in the UK, Rich Gregory, great guy. Um,
Nice shout out.
yeah, if you're listening, thanks, Rich. But he's big on all the stuff you were just saying, right? It's like know your customer, specialize, focus. He tells me to focus a lot, which is an ongoing challenge. But I went back through off the back of being berated, stroke advised by him over the past couple of months. I went back through our experience over the past probably 10 years in the B2B space and was like, right, well, who have we worked with? What kind of industries have we actually specialized in? Who do we know really well? Um, and obviously there's like hardcore technology companies like you guys. And then there was investment banking of various kinds and insurance slash risk companies. And digging into that was really interesting because that then allowed us to do a bit more evaluation of, okay, well, why is that useful to you potentially as a customer? And we were like, well, we're exactly as you said, we're about 5 steps ahead of anyone else in the space because we already know, the guardrails, we know what you kind of can't do. We understand like the regulation around those industries and the ins and outs of marketing to people and who's just going to slam a door in your face and who isn't. So I kind of didn't really realize that was, this sounds stupid saying it now, like that valuable until I went through this exercise and was like, oh no, people actually do value that because we don't have to have 7 meetings where we, find out about your industry and get to know like who you are and what you care about as a technology marketer, because that's all just stuff that we know already. But that's where I've actually found, talking to stuff like chat's quite helpful because then being able to reiterate that in a more, user-friendly fashion is a challenge when you, as you'll know, when you're deep inside an industry and you're kind of in the bubble. Um, so that's where I think they can be super successful, right? Which sounds like you're saying as well. You just kind of, you can be like, look, if I've never heard of digital marketing, why do I care about what like this company does? And getting a simple summary of that is great.
Yeah, exactly. And don't get we should probably save this for another episode, but
Yeah.
threads.
Oh yeah. So a whole other conversations we had there, right?
Yeah. So there is a lot to be said for what people bubble up to the top in terms of trending hashtags, which when you overlay it against the rest of the world isn't actually trending.
Yeah. Yeah. Threads, by the way, is Meta's new Twitter clone. In case you've been under a rock, if you're in marketing or if you're like a normal person. But it's interesting, right? Because I joined just out of curiosity. I actually think the platform itself is quite cool. Like it's like a nicer version of Twitter. But I was immediately bombarded with all the kind of crap I was expecting, like old memes, people posting the same stuff that they post on every other social network, and just a whole array of, you know, people joining who are just social media people who are like, what's all this about a new social network? You're like, okay, we're not a bit past that, having gone through 7 or 8 massive social networks at this point.
No, we're not. And this is where we're coming back to what are you using the AI tools for?
Mm.
There's a new social media network, and it's still the same format. It's to stop the rampant biases, ignorance, prejudices,
Mm.
evil presences on Facebook. I mean, come on, is that what we've come to?
Yeah.
It was funny. I joined We Are
Yeah.
8 for about 2 seconds,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then couldn't get the mobile interface to work. So I went, well, forget that. So it still comes down to the experience, and
Yeah.
what's the experience that we're providing?
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think maybe I'm just too old and, embittered about social, having been around since almost the very start of this point, where, the utility of most of these networks is now massively superseded by having to fight your way through a huge pile of just crap stuff. And Instagram's a perfect example of this, where it's like showing my age now, but back in the day when Instagram first launched and it was just a photo network akin to Flickr, but slightly more trendy, it was super cool because it had loads of photographers on.
It
It
was
encouraged
really
everyone to like
cool.
actually take pictures, and like the
Yeah,
filters were fun. That was really good. And the minute that Facebook, as they were then, bought it, you knew that they were just nailing some massive stakes into all of its, essential organs, because all they did was ram in their advertising model, shoehorn in their crappy algorithm from the Facebook feed, and like that was it now. It's just influencers, crap video, and like it's actually a fight to see stuff that your friends post on there. So yeah, I just don't see how Threads will be any different. I think it's going to ride a wave of being clean for a bit, and then it'll get the meta treatment in 6 to 12 months max.
exactly. It's going to be clean and shiny, and there'll be lots of B2C marketers who flood to it.
Mm,
And then already we're getting call out going, "Oh, B2B marketers, you should be aware of this." Not yet.
You're
Let
like, I'm very aware of it. Thanks.
I'm hyper aware. Thank
Yeah.
you. And this is where I think places who specialize, who know what they're about, will actually do well. LinkedIn's not going to go away.
Mm.
LinkedIn is extremely specialized, and what I love on LinkedIn,
Go on.
I'm prone to a good rant as much as the next person, but I won't post that on LinkedIn.
Mm. That's
Uh,
funny because a lot of people do seem to do that now.
well, if you see that they sort of get pushed down in the feed, or there are people who comment and say this is not the right forum, and it's all
Mm.
very genteel and it's all very civilized. This is simply not the right forum, and that's what I like, because for me as an advertiser, LinkedIn, you can't get that kind of targeting that you
Yeah,
get in LinkedIn.
yeah,
And that's what they've got. Whereas Facebook, remember we were talking about demographic segments that suck? That's what Facebook bases it on.
yeah.
So I think there's life in the old girl yet. That's got a double meaning.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'll be interested to see where it goes from here.
Yeah, look, I think that's again like quite a salient point right now, because I was reading some thrilling stats from last year on advertising spend across Australia, and something, don't quote me on this exactly, I'll find the link, but something like 40 to 45% of media spend, digital media spend, was wasted last year across Australia, and people have increased their spend this year, I think, which to me either suggests that people are just not paying attention to the basics of digital advertising, or they're not staying across all these changes across all these networks, and the various layers of technology inside the advertising system that are leeching money away from your budgets. And it all comes down to some basics like channel selection, and also a lot
Mm.
of the changes like the removal of cookies, and like the fact that you can't target as efficiently as you could in some areas. So what, like, are you seeing the same thing now, Melinda? Like, have you
So much.
experienced any of that yourself, or seen it in
So much. And it's really funny because LinkedIn has become a delivery mechanism of choice. And not for any other reason other than what it can deliver in
Mm,
terms of targeting. Retargeting, if they don't accept your cookies, is really hard to do. I know that we tend to get lazy and just accept cookies, and then we see
yeah.
those things traveling around us. But the other thing is looking at places like SEMrush and getting those reports and trying to figure out where these people's watering holes are.
Mm,
I've run a lot of experiments with platforms like Reddit, because you can't advertise there, but what else can you do there? And I think this is now a good time for us to stop being lazy marketers,
mm,
because once upon a time in digital you could just cover probably about 6 channels as delivery mechanisms and let them run. But when you're facing budget restrictions, when you're trying to do new market entry,
mm,
and as well as, are there any new capabilities to a product that you have to push as opposed to a different one? You've really got to look at what channels are performing.
yeah,
And what I'm finding is Google search still performs.
yeah,
It still brings those people to you.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
and it's cost effective.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a perfect example where, because I've been running this, I've resisted for as long as possible, just paying any media vendors any money for flow state for as long as I could. But we've turned on like a few pretty tightly targeted Google Ads campaigns recently, and they're actually performing super well. But it's because we do what you used to do all the time in the olden days, and we're like, we only specifically want to turn this one on for like we've got a brand awareness one running that's just all based around B2B agency and or service provider terms. There's probably only 20 or 30 keywords in there. But that's performing perfectly as intended. It's driving people to the website, which was the
Yes.
purpose of doing it, and it is doing that. And people are chatting to us, and like the green shoots of kind of leads are coming through now, and it's just because we did the basics of marketing, where we were like, it's largely a brand awareness campaign. We want to get people to our website and see if our website works. Like, it's pretty straightforward stuff.
You're taking a lot of this for granted because this is like you're hearkening me back to my beginnings in digital, which was, what does your business do?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
that simple.
yeah.
Because then you can create 4 or 5 use cases and put it out there and you get a response immediately. And no, they're not going to give you their credit card details now.
Well, yeah,
You've
exactly.
got to
I
give
mean,
them time. They've
why
got to
would
come
you?
back. But it's really funny that this still performs.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what's funny, right? Because I know we're sort of just teaching each
You
other
know,
how
we could
to
talk about
suck eggs at
keywords.
this point, right? Like, but the tried and true methods, as you said, in times of trying times, as we allegedly are experiencing now, right? Economically, search works, SEO works, content works, and some social media now works. Those are like the things that we've been using since I started working in digital marketing, like whatever that was, 15, 16 years ago. They were like, they work for a reason, and everything else that floats around them, like, sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. But that's just, it should be your go-to, surely, for if you're getting your budgets cut, you'd be like, well, don't cut search, don't cut like any very targeted, kind of defined interest, don't cut anything that's first party based. Like, it just seems like people have forgotten the basics
Because
of
they
how
don't
to
know the
market.
basics. I honestly believe in performance media, you have to have a really solid foundation
Mm,
to know it. Because a
yeah.
lot of people will say, "Oh, digital. Oh, yeah, we've got ad campaigns running."
Yeah.
But do you delve into them? Do you understand why you've put them together? It's really interesting what you're talking about just now, because you're probably the only group that I've had the pleasure of working with
Thank you.
on social that doesn't say post every day.
I don't see the point though. It's just creating, like, unless there's a reason to do it, right? Like, you're just creating extra work
You say
for no real
post when you've got
outcome.
something to say, and post when it's relevant and when it means something coming from you, not just here's a post.
Well, do you know what? It's funny. I mean, drawing this back to your point about content and AI and how this can be more helpful, I think one of the risks you identified is, now that things are easier, the potential risk is you just sort of increasing the volume of rubbish stuff that people can generate instead of optimizing, doing less with more,
Yes,
more with less, not less with more. That's the wrong way around.
yes.
Doing more with less. But are you seeing that as well? Like, are you worried that there'll be a flood of, now AI generated rubbish floating across the internet that will now go back into these models? And
People have been talking about this for years. They have been talking about um, b- training biased models.
mm,
So on one hand, I'm really excited by there is a tool out there where you can train models on only your point of view, your content, your previous content. But at the same time, what if everyone uses that tool?
yeah, well, exactly, yeah.
There is huge scope for bias. If you just look at your own CRMs, I mean, my God, how much rubbish is in there?
Well, exactly, yeah. Whenever,
And imagine training um, a model on that.
mm,
So I think that's really important for us to think about, because there is going to be so much rubbish. And if you look at the Facebook algorithms, that's machine learning at its finest.
mm.
They're really incredible pieces of technological advancement,
Oh, totally.
and they were done to promote horrible ethics or lack of ethics.
Well, it's just unfortunate that they spend so much time and money telling you what's popular in a very small sort of field and scope of data, right?
Yeah. So people will always seek out their own pockets of information, and that's okay. But when we're looking at these big scale biases, there is a real danger
Yeah.
there.
And look, I think I agree with you. I think where the value is from my conversations so far, I think you and I have spoken about this as well, is there's the external, if you can find the right information, know your customer piece. I think should be a no-brainer for anyone working in this space to be looking at now. And then internally, if you touched on a source of intense frustration for me, Melinda, in the CRM point, where looking at your CRM and or your marketing channels and being able to say who is interacting with us the most in a useful manner should be the other. Those two things should go hand in hand, right? Because then you've got the what do people want out here and what are they talking about, plus are we actually engaging those people, yes or no? But I haven't spoken to anyone who's in a position to do both of those things well now, which is somewhat concerning. I don't know if they're out there somewhere and I just am not hearing about them. But if you nailed both of those things, then your marketing efforts should kind of be on autopilot from that point, because you should be able to steer the ship in the direction of, your customers demonstrating an interest and then understand if you're engaging them correctly. Am I like a way off the mark there, or is that an accurate characterization of where we should be going?
I think you're describing a utopian version. And trust me, I've been on this personal little hobby horse for quite a while now. It is because there's technology that can do this. There's Terminus, there's Sixth Sense, there's Demand Base, but they all rely on your data being able to connect to that. They all rely on, can you connect all of your other channels? So it comes again. We're coming back to what is the quality of that data, and I think I do have to disagree with you because you're not going to get that, because you've got
Yeah.
sales who wants to view one dashboard, marketing wants to view it in a dashboard. Everyone is strapped for time. So until someone gets really comfortable with the fact that it's not going to be easy, we're just going to see more dashboards,
Yeah.
and people aren't diving into it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, I think, because I personally bounce around a lot between this of the, as you say, the utopian view of where we could go versus, what people just want to pay us to do at the moment, which are not necessarily right next to each other. But I feel like one can lead to the other with the right customers and, desire, but it can feel like a bit of an uphill struggle sometimes, I think.
I'm going to say something which is highly biased.
Go on.
There is that difference with the various sort of plug and play models that you've got going with Flow State, which is that we're here, we're a resource. Use us to help explain the data to you so that you're getting the most out of that data. And a lot of people that I've worked with, here's your dashboard. Oh, really?
Yeah. Cheers. See you
Yeah,
later.
yeah.
Right.
It's the same with post every day,
Mm,
end of conversation.
yeah.
So that's what I appreciate, and that's what I think, like if we're talking about whose jobs are on the line, I think that type of model is where we should be moving to, rather than automate this, automate everything, post every day, bang, bye, and here's your dashboard.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So what you're giving is, here is real insight, here is the why. And a lot of us, when we're doing enterprise sales specifically, we need to know the why.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, well, I think that's where, and obviously that's great to hear. Like, but I think that's where we see, same as you. That's where we see the value of these tools at the moment. Is like it helps you get to that faster because you can answer a lot of those small why questions much more easily and effectively now than we could before. Um, and it's I think where kind of the major value is both in house and as an agency or a service provider, that you can just say, look, like exactly as you're saying, like what why is this data telling me this, or like what is the the takeaway from this big body of stuff. Back to your point about the 15-page document you got back, you can be like, well, what are the key points from this, or what are the things I should be saying if I wanted to present this to this person. That's where we find it really useful. um and as you well know, like we're big on the human connection as well, because I think that's why businesses like ours still exist, right? Because people want to work with other fun people who know how to do interesting things. And you're never going to get that from a robot at the moment, I don't think. So I know we talked a lot about how you can deploy these models to analyze things more effectively, reduce human error. There's a lot of time saving, all very practical stuff that I think everyone should be thinking about right now, given the, belt tightening and or, wallet closing, pick your favorite analogy. What are your sort of big predictions for where you see these models being used most effectively over the next sort of 12 months or so? And are there any big risks that you think are on the horizon that we need to be aware of?
Where I see them being used most effectively, I think we've already covered, is in creating that connection, not only in the minds of the people who are producing the content, ultimately responsible for it, but also in the minds of your target audience.
Mm,
The risks are the data sets. What's in those data sets that these models are being trained on? Because ChatGPT was launched as a piece of freeware and it was very exciting. And suddenly you've got millions of people playing with it.
yeah,
And if we're really going to be strict about what machine learning is going to feed, which everyone hopes is artificial intelligence, uh, this is what it's learning. Think of it like a child. This is
yeah,
what it's learning from.
yeah,
So don't, and there have been data experts who have talked about this for years. They have talked about be careful of the biases in your own data. Be
mm,
careful of that data that you share with other people because then it will go into their pool of data. It's all of this, and that is a huge risk that I see coming. And I think we as marketers should be grown up about it and not flood ChatGPT with our innermost thoughts just to
yeah.
play with it.
I think that's a very interesting characterization, actually, because have been thinking the same. It's kind of emerging from these conversations, but thinking the same thing, right? You're essentially trying to apply some sort of strange cold logic to the messy nature of human interaction with each other, because to your point, we all create tons and tons of data every day. It just doesn't get recorded and endlessly analyzed, whereas now more and more of it is. And yeah, like trying to, I mean, it would be a nightmare to try and unpick that, right, and make something useful out of the the random, day-to-day interactions that you have with everyone. All of that's now digitized, so it's yeah, it's an interesting point, I think. Well, look, thanks, Melinda, for joining. Is like I think we covered a lot of pretty interesting areas there, actually. So thank you very much for coming and having a chat. It's been a pleasure.
It's been wonderful being here. Thank you so much. I'm acutely aware that we didn't go down any rabbit holes. So
Not too deeply, I don't think,
I
which is good.
think we've done well.
There's plenty of time for that in future conversations, I think.
Wonderful. Look forward
Awesome.
to it. Thank you.
Thanks very much for listening. This is the end of the show. A few interesting points raised in this discussion. I hope you found it interesting as well. Fairly positive that AI is here to enhance our abilities and hopefully not just straight out replace them. And as Melinda noted, a very interesting use case in terms of actually using it to break down and explain very complex concepts and then use them in the creative process to actually help her team, execute more effectively, which I thought was pretty cool. If you would like to find out a bit more about who we are and what we do, please head over to our website, theflowstate.io.